All right, let's be honest. Have you ever just clicked I agree without reading a single word of the terms and conditions? Or signed some document that's just a wall of tiny print? Of course you have. We all do it. But hidden deep inside that legal jargon are clauses that can have some huge consequences. Today, we're going to pull back the curtain on one of the most powerful and, frankly, most controversial of them all, the exemption clause. So picture this. You've hired a moving company, right? You're trusting them with everything you own. And then you watch in what feels like slow motion as one of the movers drops a box. And you hear that sound, that unmistakable, heart-stopping crunch of your great-grandmother's priceless antique vase shattering into a million tiny pieces. You're furious. I mean, absolutely seeing red. But the company manager, he just calmly points to a single line in the contract you signed. And there it is, in black and white. We are not liable for any damage whatsoever. Just like that, it feels totally airtight, and suddenly you feel completely powerless. So is that it? Is that really the end of the story? Can one little sentence in a contract just wipe away all responsibility? Well, you might be surprised to learn that the law has a really interesting and pretty complex answer to that very question. Okay, so here's how we're going to break this down. We'll look at those snaky hidden clauses, and then we're going to run them through a kind of legal gauntlet. There are three big tests. First, did it even make it into the contract? Second, what do the words actually mean? And the final test, is it even fair? Let's dive in. So first up, hidden clauses, big problems. What exactly are we dealing with here? Well, in the legal world, these things have a name. They're called exemption clauses. And an exemption clause is pretty much a company's attempt to give itself a get-out-of-jail-free card. They usually come in two flavors. You've got your exclusion clause, which tries to wipe out their liability completely. That's the broken vase scenario. And then there's the limitation clause. This one's a bit sneakier. It doesn't get rid of liability, but it tries to cap it, saying something like, hey, no matter how bad we mess up, the most you can ever get from us is $100. All right, on to our first big test, getting in. This is what the lawyers call incorporation. And look, before a company can even think about using one of these clauses on you, it has to clear this first hurdle. The question is super simple. Was this clause actually officially part of the contract to begin with? And there are basically three main ways a clause can get in. The first, and by far the most powerful, is by your signature. The second way is by what's called reasonable notice. Basically, did they do a good enough job of telling you about it? And the third is through a course of dealing. This just means if you've done business with them a bunch of times under the same terms, it's kind of assumed you know the deal by now. Okay, to really get a handle on just how powerful a signature is, we need to go back in time and look at a classic case from 1934. It's famously known as the case of the faulty vending machine. So here's what happened. A woman bought a cigarette vending machine for her cafe. She signed the sales agreement, but she didn't bother to read the really tiny print. And wouldn't you know it, buried in there was a clause that excluded all warranties. Of course, the machine turned out to be a total dud. When she sued, the court delivered a pretty harsh ruling. She signed it, so she's bound by it. Simple as that. And that case set a huge precedent. A signature binds you, even if you don't read the terms. It's a stark reminder, right? But, and this is a really important but, that rule isn't absolute. What happens if someone straight up misleads you about what you're signing? Well, that brings us to another famous story in law. This time, it's the case of the stained dress. Here, a customer took her wedding dress to be cleaned and was asked to sign what they called a receipt. She asked, hey, what am I signing for? And the shop assistant told her, oh, it just says we're not responsible for any damage to the beads and sequins. So she signed it. But the reality? The clause actually excluded them from liability for any damage at all. When the dress came back with a big stain, they pointed to the contract. But the court said, nope, because the assistant misrepresented what she was signing. That verbal statement completely overrode the written clause. Okay, but what if there's no signature? Think about a parking garage ticket or a sign on a wall. In those cases, it all comes down to reasonable notice. The key thing is they have to tell you about the term before or at the moment you make the contract. There was this famous case with a hotel where a notice on the back of the hotel room door was found to be too late because, hey, you've already made the contract when you paid at the front desk. And, the more surprising or harsh a clause is, the more they have to do to bring it to your attention. This led to something called the red hand rule. A judge literally said that for some clauses, you'd need to print them in red ink with a big red hand pointing right at them to make it fair. It's a fantastic image, isn't it? It just means the more you're trying to take away, the louder you have to shout about it. Okay, so let's say a clause passes that first test. It's officially in the contract. We're not done yet. Now we move to the second test. What does it actually mean? The court is going to look at the exact wording and ask, does this language really cover the specific thing that went wrong? This is the hurdle of interpretation. And the guiding principle here is a cool-sounding Latin rule, contra proferentum. All it really means is that if there's any doubt or ambiguity in the wording of a clause, the court will read it against the party who wrote it and is now trying to rely on it. So the bottom line is, if you write a vague, sloppy clause, you don't get the benefit of the doubt. And that brings us to the final test. And honestly, this is the big one. This is the ultimate safety net. Even if a clause gets into the contract, and even if its wording seems crystal clear, the law itself can step in and say, no, that's not allowed. This is the final hurdle. Is it fair? Now, the law is smart here. It knows there's a difference between two big companies making a deal and a regular person buying something. So for business-to-business contracts, there's a law that applies a test of reasonableness. But, and this is key for most of us, for consumer contracts, the Consumer Rights Act is way tougher. It uses a fairness test. It asks, does this term cause a significant imbalance that's unfair to the consumer? And some things are just completely off the table now. For example, a company can never, ever use a clause to escape liability if their negligence causes death or personal injury. That's automatically legal, period. All right, so we've run these clauses through the whole gauntlet. Let's bring it all home. What's the big takeaway? What does all this actually mean for you? The most important thing to remember is this 3-step checklist. The next time you're faced with one of those scary-looking clauses, don't just give up and assume it's the final word. Mentally run it through these questions. 1. Was it even properly incorporated? Did they tell you about it fairly? 2. Is the wording crystal clear and does it actually cover what happened? And 3, the big one. Is it even lawful? Is it fair? It's your personal legal shield. And remember, this whole system of protection didn't just appear out of nowhere. It was built, brick by brick, over decades by real cases. You had the tough lesson from the estranged vending machine case about signatures. Then Curtis came along and showed how misrepresentation can be a trump card. Oli taught us that notice has to be timely. And other cases have clarified that even for really serious breaches, a super clear and fair clause might still hold up. Every one of these stories added another layer to the shield that protects us today. So the bottom line is this: you are not powerless. Yes, companies use contracts to limit their risk, and that's understandable. But the law has put a really robust shield in place to make sure that doesn't go too far, protecting both businesses and especially us, the consumers, from being steamrolled by unfair terms. But here's the thing, that shield only works if you pick it up and use it. It's there, but you have to be the one to challenge an unfair term. So the next time you read something in the fine print that just doesn't feel right, remember everything we've talked about. The law is on your side. But it leaves you with one final question. When was the last time you actually challenged it?